You've probably read about Pompeii, the town that was buried when Mount Vesuvius erupted. And you may well have seen the eruption of Mount St. Helens on television. Well, about 100 years ago, all of that happened here because this was the village of Te Wairoa in New Zealand. It used to be New Zealand's principal tourist resort because it's in the middle of a geothermal area, and people would come from all over the world to stay here, and they'd go off and see the sights. They were spectacular sights like geysers and bubbling mud pools, and very beautiful sights too, like the terraces formed when the silica drops out of water as it bubbles to the Earth's surface. The most beautiful of them all were the famous pink and white terraces, so grand that they were described by somebody as the 8th wonder of the world. The tourists stayed in this village, and they were taken by war canoe, Maori war canoe, this is the remains of one of them, across a nearby lake over to the edge of Mount Tarawera, and that's where the terraces lay. But all of that came to a very abrupt end one night in 1886. With an explosion that was so big that it could be heard over the seas in Australia, the mountain blew up. Great chunks of it went high into the air and descended for kilometres around here, burying everything metres deep in ash and mud. This is what the village looked like before the eruption. This is what it looked like afterwards. It was New Zealand's worst calamity. More than 150 people died here, most of them Maoris. This was the hut of the tohunga. Now, to the Maoris, the tohunga was a cross between a priest, a sorcerer, and a wise man. And for days before the eruption, he'd been prophesying that great disaster would overcome his tribe. Well, of course it did. Then they thought he was responsible for it, and they didn't want him to live. So he remained buried in his hut here for 4 days until rescuers came on the scene and dug him out. Miraculously, he was still alive, but he died shortly afterwards in hospital. But preserved nearby is the tohunga's hat, excavated from here. It's preserved now and completely white because of the volcanic ash. This was once a Maori hut. There's not a lot left now, only the stone fireplace and the pots that they cooked in. But it does show you the depth of the ash that fell on it. And in some places in the village, it was twice as thick as that. In the 100 years since the village was forgotten, trees have grown in. Now it's being excavated, and all these things are being revealed. Now this was a main street in the village, and just before the eruption, the villagers had put in fence posts all the way along both sides. Made of popper, they were obviously untreated, because they too were buried in the mud and the ash, and they sprouted, and now they've become these huge poplar trees. But you can still see the clue that tells you about their origin. There is the original fence post, still painted white at the top. This was a bed in the hotel where the tourists stayed. Most of them were asleep at the time of the eruption, and one of them, a young Englishman, was killed here. The others ran to safety. Now, volcanic ash is rather strange stuff. It's full of chemicals, and while it completely corrodes some things, it completely preserves others. Excavations on the cellar have revealed not only the bottles and the jars that were stored there, but the crates that they were stored in, completely preserved. It was New Zealand's worst calamity, which destroyed the village 100 years ago, but created nearby in Rotorua the spectacular sights that people now come to see.
Curiosity.